The vast, open waters of the Caribbean Sea stretched endlessly, calm and deceptive, hiding a tension that only a few could sense. Out of the blue, a fleet of unmarked Venezuelan warships began moving steadily toward a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, claiming to be nothing more than routine training exercises. But any seasoned naval observer would know that nothing about this approach seemed routine. The warships moved with a deliberate, unnerving precision, almost as if they were testing the nerves of the carrier crew. Every radar blip, every engine roar, and every distant silhouette on the horizon added to an atmosphere thick with anticipation. For the crew aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, and for anyone observing from a safe distance, the questions began to pile up. Why were these vessels unmarked? What was their true objective? And most importantly, how close would they dare to come before the line of caution became impossible to ignore? The scene was quiet, almost eerily so, but the calm was misleading. A subtle tension gripped the waters. Even the slightest movement of a ship, the distant hum of a radar, or the shadow of a sail against the sunset could spark a chain reaction. Every officer on the carrier was alert, scanning the horizon, analyzing the trajectory, trying to predict the next move of the approaching fleet. The silence was not just the absence of noise, it was the absence of certainty. The unknown had a way of magnifying fear, and these unmarked ships carried with them the perfect storm of mystery and potential threat. It was the kind of suspense that made every second feel like an eternity, the kind that could make even the most disciplined sailors grip their consoles just a little tighter, eyes darting between instruments and the horizon beyond. As the fleet drew closer, the reality of the situation began to crystallize. Venezuela, though claiming a mere exercise, had strategically positioned their vessels in a formation that maximized their visibility while maintaining a deceptive element of control. The unmarked hulls, devoid of any flags or insignia, were almost ghostly against the sunlit waves. Each vessel seemed to move independently, yet in sync, creating a choreography of uncertainty that kept the carrier's crew guessing. Every maneuver seemed calculated to provoke, yet carefully measured to avoid outright confrontation, at least for now. This was a game of psychological tension, an invisible tug-of-war, where the smallest misstep could escalate into a full-blown crisis. On board the carrier, officers and analysts worked in silence, communicating in hushed tones and passing data with a precision born of years of training. Radar readings were cross-checked, sonar pings interpreted, and flight deck operations paused momentarily as the command team assessed the threat. It was a delicate balance. Acknowledge the approach without overreacting, monitor every potential maneuver without revealing the full capabilities of the carrier group. This was not just a test of firepower, but a test of patience, strategy, and nerves. The tension on the open water was mirrored in the control rooms, where the hum of electronics and the rhythmic tapping of consoles formed a soundtrack to an unfolding standoff. Every movement of the Venezuelan fleet created ripples, not just on the water, but in the minds of the U.S. Navy crew. Questions multiplied. Were these warships probing defenses, testing reaction times? Or was this simply a bold display meant to assert dominance? Whatever the intent, one fact became increasingly clear. The situation was evolving rapidly. What was supposed to be a simple training exercise had the potential to spiral into something far more dangerous, something that could challenge the composure and decision-making skills of even the most experienced naval officers. As the unmarked ships closed the distance, the suspense grew, drawing both crew and audience into a scenario where every second mattered, and the line between routine and threat blurred in the unpredictable expanse of the Caribbean Sea. The unmarked Venezuelan warships weren't just approaching. They were setting the stage for a moment that would test the discipline, strategy, and resolve of the U.S. Navy in ways that no training exercise could simulate. And as the sun reflected off the waves, casting long shadows across the water, it became chillingly evident. This was the calm before a storm, the quiet before a decision that could change everything. Every eye remained fixed on the horizon, every mind alert, knowing deep down that whatever happened next would define the meaning of calculated risk, naval superiority, and the fine line that separates caution from catastrophe. As the unmarked Venezuelan warships steadily closed in on the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, every sensor and radar system aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford began to light up with critical information. The crew, trained to react under extreme tension, immediately identified the formation and trajectory of the approaching fleet. At first glance, the movement seemed disciplined and coordinated, but a closer analysis revealed subtle inconsistencies. Radar operators noticed slight deviations in course, inconsistent speeds, and minor gaps between the vessels that should not have existed if this were a professional naval operation. It quickly became apparent that these unmarked ships, despite their aggressive approach, were not operating with the precision or discipline that one would expect from a fully trained fleet. The Venezuelan ships appeared bold, closing the distance as if to test the carrier's defensive perimeter, yet their maneuvers betrayed hesitation and uncertainty. The crew aboard the U.S. carrier observed that some vessels were drifting too close to one another, while others were advancing at uneven intervals. Even the approach angles seemed misjudged, bringing the fleet dangerously close to zones that could easily have exposed them to countermeasures. It was a classic display of overconfidence paired with inexperience, a combination that often leads to disastrous consequences in naval engagements. Each small error, while individually insignificant, started forming a pattern that suggested the Venezuelan command did not fully comprehend the scope of the task they had undertaken. Meanwhile, the carrier's command team began analyzing the data with a calm, methodical precision. Officers discussed the optimal response strategies, all the while tracking subtle changes in the enemy formation. The crew's awareness highlighted the contrast between the disciplined operational protocols of the U.S. Navy and the Venezuelan fleet's growing errors. The unmarked ships continued their aggressive push, seemingly unaware that each decision, each adjustment, and each miscalculated maneuver was feeding into a larger picture that the carrier's crew could read like an open book. The mistakes were minor at first: a ship drifting slightly off course, a patrol boat adjusting its speed too slowly, but these small deviations compounded into a significant tactical advantage for the U.S. Navy. Tension on the water began to escalate naturally as the Venezuelan ships approached. The close proximity of the unmarked vessels caused the carrier crew to reassess safe maneuvering distances while maintaining full operational readiness. Radar operators noted that one of the patrol boats was moving closer than safety protocols recommended, creating a potential collision hazard if the ship did not correct its course. Another vessel appeared to overestimate the carrier group's speed, slowing down at the wrong moment and forcing minor course corrections that risked breaking formation. These errors, though subtle, became increasingly evident as the ships continued their advance. The Venezuelan fleet's approach, meant to demonstrate strength, now revealed its vulnerabilities. The mistakes were not limited to navigation. Communication between the Venezuelan vessels seemed inconsistent, with signals that occasionally contradicted one another. Orders appeared delayed or misinterpreted, causing hesitation in critical moments. As these errors accumulated, the U.S. Navy crew had a clear understanding. The enemy had misjudged both the distance and the strength of their target. What was supposed to be an assertive display of naval power was now shaping up to be a series of tactical blunders that the U.S. carrier group could exploit with precision. Yet, remarkably, the situation remained calm on the U.S. side. No weapons had been deployed. No warning shots had been fired. The tension alone, the psychological pressure of being observed by a technologically superior opponent while simultaneously making mistakes, was beginning to take its toll on the Venezuelan fleet. Every minor misstep, every hesitation, magnified the perception of U.S. superiority. The enemy, unaware of the strategic advantage being read by the carrier crew, was unwittingly preparing the stage for a dramatic response that could turn the situation decisively in favor of the U.S. Navy. As the unmarked ships continued their approach, the pattern of miscalculations became even clearer. Speed adjustments were mistimed, alignment with the carrier's course was slightly off, and coordination between vessels faltered. From the perspective of the U.S. Navy, these were textbook errors, mistakes that could have disastrous consequences if a hostile engagement were to occur. But for now, the errors created an almost cinematic tension, a scenario where the enemy's aggression was countered not with force, but with calm observation, patience, and the quiet calculation of a highly trained crew. By the time the Venezuelan fleet reached a position dangerously close to the carrier, the situation had fully escalated. What started as a bold approach had transformed into a series of tactical errors, all unfolding under the watchful eyes of the U.S. Navy. The enemy had overestimated its capabilities, underestimated the discipline of its opponent, and inadvertently revealed the gaps in its own operation. These mistakes set the stage for the next phase of the encounter, a moment where the U.S. Navy would assert its dominance with precision, ensuring that every misstep by the approaching fleet would be met with consequences carefully measured and silently executed. As the unmarked Venezuelan warships edged closer, the crew aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford remained calm, a testament to years of rigorous training and discipline. Without firing a single missile or even revealing the full extent of their firepower, the U.S. Navy executed a precise and calculated series of maneuvers designed to neutralize the threat without escalating the situation into open conflict. Destroyers in the carrier strike group silently shifted positions, creating a defensive perimeter that subtly but effectively constrained the movements of the approaching fleet. The adjustments were seamless, almost imperceptible to the enemy, yet they established a clear message. Any misstep could be met with overwhelming force. The calm professionalism of the U.S. crew contrasted sharply with the visible tension and miscalculations of the Venezuelan fleet. High above, aircraft were put on standby, engines humming quietly, radar and targeting systems scanning the surrounding waters with meticulous precision. Every flight deck operator knew their role: maintain readiness, observe the enemy, and be prepared for immediate action if necessary. Yet for now, there was no need to escalate with weapons. The strategy relied on positioning, timing, and the silent assertion of naval dominance. The unmarked ships, while bold in their approach, were being subtly corralled into positions that maximized their exposure to U.S. naval sensors while minimizing any risk to the carrier. This maneuvering was a masterclass in psychological warfare, demonstrating power without aggression, asserting authority without direct confrontation. The Venezuelan commanders, initially confident in their aggressive approach, began to sense that something was off. The ships that had seemed disorganized and hesitant at first were now facing an opponent that anticipated every move, countered every minor adjustment, and maintained complete composure under pressure. The realization began to dawn that their initial strategy, intended to project strength and test the carrier's defenses, had backfired. Each ship's positioning inadvertently exposed weaknesses not in the U.S. Navy, but in their own approach. Small errors that might have been overlooked in a chaotic engagement were now magnified by the carrier's strategic dominance. As the carrier group silently adjusted, the unmarked warships suddenly found themselves in an environment that felt far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Distances that once seemed safe now closed in calculated ways. Channels of potential escape were subtly restricted, and the ever-present threat of rapid aircraft deployment loomed overhead. The Venezuelan fleet, which had started the encounter with a show of audacious confidence, now grappled with an uncomfortable and urgent truth. They had misjudged the strength, discipline, and technology of the U.S. Navy. Every movement they had made, every miscalculation along the way, had been carefully observed and accounted for. And then came the pivotal moment, the moment that defines every Navy break scenario, the then this happened point. The Venezuelan commanders realized that they had been outmaneuvered without a single shot being fired. The advanced radar systems, coordinated positioning of the destroyers, and the silent threat of rapid aerial deployment forced a psychological retreat. The enemy fleet, which had approached with aggression and bravado, now had to reconsider their strategy entirely. The miscalculations, minor as they initially seemed, now compounded into a tactical disadvantage that left them no choice but to back away. From the perspective of the U.S. Navy, this was the culmination of disciplined training, advanced technology, and flawless execution. The Carrier Strike Group had asserted dominance silently, turning a potentially dangerous encounter into a controlled demonstration of power. The Venezuelan fleet's retreat was not just a physical withdrawal. It was a moment of recognition, a psychological concession that their initial assumptions had been dangerously flawed. This realization amplified the tension and drama for anyone observing, creating a narrative where intelligence, composure, and strategic patience triumphed over raw aggression. The unmarked warships gradually pulled back, their advance halted by the invisible hand of calculated naval authority. For the U.S. Navy crew, this was a textbook display of how tactical superiority can be achieved without firing a single weapon. For the enemy, it was a humbling lesson in underestimating an opponent's preparation, coordination, and technological edge. The psychological impact of this encounter extended beyond the immediate moment, serving as a silent warning to any fleet daring to approach the carrier group without careful planning. The story concluded not with explosions or destruction, but with a quiet, undeniable affirmation of the U.S. Navy's dominance and the strategic futility of misjudged aggression. As the unmarked Venezuelan warships slowly retreated, the U.S. carrier group resumed its course, maintaining full operational readiness while facing minimal disruption to its overarching mission. The tension that had dominated the previous hours began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of controlled authority emanating from the disciplined movements of the fleet. Every officer, sailor, and analyst aboard understood that the encounter had not only demonstrated the technical capabilities of the carrier group, but also reinforced the importance of composure and strategic patience under pressure. The actions taken in those critical moments highlighted the Navy's ability to assert dominance without engaging in direct conflict, transforming a potentially volatile situation into a lesson in precision and restraint. The psychological effect of the operation extended well beyond the physical retreat of the opposing fleet. Each maneuver executed by the carrier group had been deliberate, measured, and silently commanding, sending a clear, unspoken message. Any fleet that approached without full awareness of the risks would face immediate tactical disadvantage. The retreat of the Venezuelan ships was not merely a physical withdrawal. It represented an acknowledgement of miscalculation and an understanding of the overwhelming preparedness of their counterpart. Even distant observers monitoring the encounter could sense the careful orchestration behind the carrier group's actions, witnessing a demonstration of calm control that effectively neutralized an aggressive challenge. The human element was as critical as the technological advantage. Officers had to balance vigilance with patience, constantly interpreting the movements of the approaching fleet and anticipating potential missteps. This balance between observation and restraint is what turned an aggressive approach into an educational moment for the enemy. By neither overreacting nor underestimating the threat, the carrier group maintained authority while avoiding unnecessary escalation. Every subtle shift in formation, every adjustment in position, and every silent recalibration of defensive measures contributed to a message that was clear and undeniable. Tactical superiority does not always require weapons to be deployed, and control over a situation can be asserted through disciplined execution alone. From the perspective of the Venezuelan fleet, the retreat was a humbling experience. The initial confidence, which had guided them into close proximity with the carrier group, was replaced by a sobering recognition of the margin for error in naval operations. Every minor error they had made during their advance, from misjudging distance to mistiming maneuvers, had been capitalized upon without a single engagement occurring. The realization that their aggressive posturing had achieved the opposite of its intended effect reinforced the psychological dominance of the carrier group. It was a moment that subtly reshaped the perception of risk, authority, and respect on the open seas, emphasizing the consequences of underestimating an opponent's capacity for strategic foresight. Observers, analysts, and even viewers of recorded footage would find that the encounter exemplified the principles of disciplined naval conduct. The power of preparation, the effectiveness of silent control, and the psychological leverage exerted over an opponent became evident as the carrier group continued its operations unimpeded. The sequence of events showcased how an organization with superior training, communication, and technological integration can manage a potentially aggressive situation efficiently, transforming what could have been a confrontation into a demonstration of controlled dominance. The encounter became a case study in how restraint, combined with tactical precision, can yield results far more impactful than overt displays of force. Ultimately, the withdrawal of the unmarked ships and the continuation of the carrier group's mission highlighted the importance of strategy, calm decision-making, and anticipation in naval operations. The lessons imparted extended beyond the immediate participants, illustrating that encounters on the sea are as much about psychological mastery as they are about physical capability. The silent warnings sent by the disciplined maneuvers and measured responses reinforced a universal truth in maritime strategy. Approaching a well-prepared opponent without full comprehension of the risks can lead to instant disadvantage, and the demonstration of restraint can be as powerful as the deployment of any weapon system. By concluding the scenario without firing a shot, the encounter left an indelible impression, combining suspense, authority, and strategic insight, and ensuring that the narrative lingered in the minds of both participants and observers alike.